You've been pushing government paper for 12 years and you still can't afford a decent dress. My father let those words drop right into the center of the Palmer House ballroom lobby, his voice pitched perfectly to carry over 200 champagne flutes and the low murmur of Chicago's most powerful people in evening wear. He looked me up and down with the flat, dismissive eyes of a man appraising livestock, my navy blazer, my sensible flats, and then his gaze drifted away, already bored. My brother Spencer stood at his elbow, one hand resting on his wife's waist, both of them polished and gleaming in matching shades of midnight silk. Annette's earrings alone probably cost more than my monthly take-home. She pressed her fingertips to her collarbone and gave me that particular smile she always saved for charity cases. I said nothing. I reached inside my jacket and produced my credentials, the flat black case with the gold badge and photo ID of the FBI, and presented them calmly to the security checkpoint officer. The officer's eyes went wide. He reached immediately for the radio clipped to his shoulder. Within 60 seconds, 19 agents who had been standing quietly around that ballroom, as servers and guests straightened in unison. My father's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Before I tell you what happened next, and I promise you it is worth waiting for, you need to understand how we got to that lobby, because this did not begin at the Palmer House. It began 10 days earlier, in a dining room on Lakeshore Drive, over a dinner I almost didn't accept. The Davenport family estate sits at the north end of Lakeshore Drive, a 4-story limestone townhome my grandfather built in 1961 from 20 years of honest construction work. The chandelier in the formal dining room is the original, cut crystal, 17 arms, and it still throws the same cold white light it did when I was a child eating Sunday dinners with a man who believed in exactly two things: hard work and keeping your word. I thought about him often as I took my seat at the far end of the table that night. My mother, Helen, was already seated, her posture flawless, her face arranged in the careful neutrality she had perfected over 4 decades of marriage to a man who treated every room like a territory to be claimed. She did not greet me. She adjusted her napkin, sipped her white wine, and fixed her eyes on Spencer as though I were a shadow that had simply drifted in from the hall. Spencer sat at my father's right hand, relaxed in the way that only men who have never once seriously doubted their own importance can manage in stiff dining chairs. He was pouring a bottle of Camus Special Selection slowly, watching the wine catch the chandelier light like it was something he had personally arranged. Davenport Development just received preliminary confirmation. My father, Douglas, announced from the head of the table, cutting through the roasted lamb with mechanical precision. He set his knife down and surveyed the room the way a man does when he considers everything inside it to already belong to him. $175 million. HUD's Emergency Relief Housing Initiative. We are the primary contractor. Spencer raised his glass. Annette clapped, the sound bright and sharp. The Aspen renovation is happening, Annette breathed, leaning into Spencer's shoulder. I'm calling the architect Monday morning. I set my fork down quietly and kept my expression exactly even. The HUD Emergency Relief Housing Initiative was a federal program I knew well, better, it turned out, than anyone at that table had considered. After a series of severe flooding seasons left tens of thousands of low-income families across the Midwest without stable housing, Congress had authorized close to $2 billion for rapid affordable residential construction in the hardest-hit counties, federal taxpayer funds for families who had lost everything. Spencer caught me watching him. Still answering to the government, he asked, the familiar smirk sliding into place. 12 years, Cora. What do you even do all day? Read other people's invoices? Annette laughed, the sound dragging itself across my nerves like a key against glass. I looked up the pay scale, she said, inspecting her nails. GS-13. What is that, 80-something thousand? Spencer's paralegal makes more. She tilted her head at me with theatrical pity. How do you manage? I picked up my water glass and took a slow, measured sip. My pulse stayed exactly where I had trained it to stay in hostile environments. Steady, unremarkable, completely controlled. I manage fine, I said. My father had never been interested in baiting me the way Spencer was. He simply treated me the way he treated any logistics problem that had not yet been resolved. He reached beneath his chair and slid a manila folder across the polished table. It stopped in front of my bread plate. I looked at the top sheet. A federal subcontractor agreement. My name pre-printed on the signature line, my federal contractor certification number already embedded in the compliance field. I did not touch it. What is this? I asked. Formality, Spencer said, leaning back, swirling his wine. HUD wants to see someone with federal credentials listed on the compliance side. We put your certification number on the initial application. It's standard practice. You placed my federal ID on a government grant application without my knowledge or consent, I said. We placed your name where it makes sense, my father said, cutting another piece of lamb, as though the conversation had already concluded. You work for the government. This is a government contract. What exactly are you building? I asked. And where? Spencer smiled, the smile he had worn since we were children, the smile of someone who has never once needed to consider whether his answer could matter. Affordable housing units, South Lakeview, Wicker Park corridor. I folded my hands on the table. South Lakeview, Wicker Park. Neighborhoods where a one-bedroom apartment ran $3,000 a month minimum. Neighborhoods about as far from flood-displaced low-income housing as a building could geographically be while still existing in the same city. The Emergency Relief Program has income and location eligibility requirements written directly into the federal statute, I said quietly. They are not guidelines, they are law. My father set his silverware down with a slow, controlled click. You have spent 12 years counting other people's money, he said. We have spent 30 years building this city. Do not lecture me about real estate. Spencer leaned forward and the easy performance dropped entirely out of his posture. Sign the paper, he said. Your name is already on the federal documents. If you refuse to cooperate, you look like you're obstructing a deal you voluntarily joined. That is a conversation you do not want to have with your supervisors. The threat was clean and practiced, which told me he had rehearsed it more than once. I looked at my mother. She was studying the stem of her wine glass. You want me to sign off on fraud, I said. You want me to help steal relief money from families who lost their homes in a flood. Annette made an exasperated sound. The units will exist. They'll just be market rate. The program language is flexible. It is not flexible, I said. It is a federal statute with criminal penalties. My father pushed back slightly from the table, the deliberate, final movement of a man issuing a verdict. You never understood how the real world works, he said. You hid behind a badge because you could not compete. Spencer built something. I built something. You process other people's paperwork and call it a career. He pointed at the folder. Sign it. Or we will inform HUD that you were the compliance officer of record who reviewed and approved every document in this application. Enjoy explaining that to your director. The dining room went completely quiet. The crystal chandelier hummed faintly overhead. I thought about my grandfather, about the two things he believed in absolutely. I reached out and picked up the pen they had placed beside the folder, rolled it once between my fingers, set it back down on the table without uncapping it. I'm going to give you one opportunity to withdraw your company's application and remove my name from those documents, I said. 1. Spencer pushed back his chair. Get out of this house, he said. I drove home through the cold Chicago night with both hands steady on the wheel and my mind already running the checklist. I had been recording since I sat down at that table. The watch on my left wrist is not standard issue. It is a covert recording device assigned exclusively to agents conducting authorized undercover financial investigations. Every word spoken in that dining room, every threat, every confession, every casual reference to offshore routing, and my federal certification number was already encrypted and secured on an FBI server. But a dinner conversation, even a recorded one, was not enough to build the case I intended to build. The next 4 days I worked in the Financial Crimes Division building, pulling the document trail apart layer by layer. The shell company structure Davenport Development had assembled was sophisticated on the surface. 3 LLCs nested inside 2 Delaware holding companies, but it was the kind of sophistication designed to fool auditors, not forensic accountants, with 12 years of practice and a very specific reason to look hard. I found the offshore routing through the Cayman accounts. I found my federal contractor certification number embedded in Section 7 of the HUD application, forged into a compliance certification I had never signed. I found the project cost breakdowns where imported Italian tile appeared under code-required flooring and a rooftop terrace was itemized as emergency egress infrastructure. Then, on the 4th night, I found the email thread. It was buried in a folder titled Legal Contingency on the project's internal server, accessed under a search warrant signed by a federal judge at 2:09 in the morning. The thread was between my father and Spencer, dated 7 months earlier, months before they had ever called to invite me to dinner. My father's first message read, If HUD conducts an audit, the criminal exposure rests entirely with the compliance officer of record. We need a name in that field, someone with genuine federal credentials who can absorb the liability without the exposure tracing back to us, someone we can manage. Spencer's reply came 90 minutes later. Cora. She's been in the FBI long enough to have a clearance number and a legitimate paper trail. She won't know how we used it until the investigation is already underway. If she refuses to cooperate when we approach her, the documentation already exists. Her word against the record. You know which one a federal prosecutor looks at first. My father. Proceed. Invite her to dinner next month. Give her the chance to cooperate. If she won't, the paper trail covers us regardless. I read that thread 3 times. I closed the file. I pressed both palms flat against the edge of my desk. I sat in the complete silence of an empty federal office building at 2:30 in the morning and let the full shape of what they had done settle through me without trying to stop it. They had arranged this before they ever picked up the phone to invite me to dinner. The dinner was not recruitment. It was a formality. They had already decided I was the exit strategy. Sign and cooperate or refuse and become the target. Either way, I was the name on the document. Either way, they walked away clean. When I opened my eyes, I was done treating this as a family matter. I called my director. Director Hollins had known me for 9 years. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. The Spencer Davenport Business Excellence Award Ceremony, I said. Next Friday night, Palmer House Ballroom, Mayor's Office representatives, 3 aldermen, the Chicago Commercial Real Estate Association, 200 of the right people in one room. Another silence. You want to give them the stage, he said. They have been performing on it their entire lives, I said. Give them one more curtain call. I heard him lean back in his chair. How many agents do you need? 19 undercover. I'll coordinate directly with the hotel security chief. He said yes. He also said the evidence package was among the cleanest federal contract fraud cases the division had assembled in years. He said he was proud of the work. I thanked him and returned to my monitor. The next 6 days I spent building the trap wire by wire, placing agents inside the Palmer House waitstaff rotation and the event's security detail, reviewing the ballroom floor plan until I could walk it with my eyes closed, coordinating with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the HUD Inspector General's office, and the U.S. Attorney's Office, which had already agreed to execute simultaneous asset freezes the moment the warrants were served. If you have ever been as angry as I was in those 6 days, not hot angry, not the kind that makes noise, but the cold refined kind that burns clean and leaves no residue, then you understand that sleep becomes irrelevant. I ran on black coffee and a clarity that only arrives when the work and the personal stakes are exactly the same thing. Which returns us to the Palmer House lobby, 10 days after dinner on Lakeshore Drive. My father spotted me before I reached the checkpoint. He was holding a scotch, standing with a cluster of developers and city officials, wearing the ease of a man who has never once faced accountability in a room full of people who might hold him to it. You've been pushing government paper for 12 years, and you still can't afford a decent dress. I produced my credentials. The security officer reached for his radio. 19 agents straightened simultaneously. Spencer went the specific pale of a man watching his contingency plan dissolve in real time. Annette grabbed his arm. Her mouth moved. I held my father's gaze for 3 full seconds. Then I walked past him, past the checkpoint, and into the ballroom. The ceremony began on schedule. The program chair approached the podium. The lights dimmed over 200 guests settling comfortably into their seats, champagne and dinner rolls, the easy murmur of people expecting a thoroughly ordinary evening. Before we present this evening's awards, the program chair said, "We have been asked to yield the floor briefly to a representative of the federal government." I walked out of the side entrance and onto the stage. Navy blazer, sensible flats, FBI credentials clipped to my lapel where every person in that ballroom could read them. There is a particular sound that a room full of Chicago power brokers makes when it goes completely silent all at once. I know exactly what it sounds like now. My name is Special Agent Cora Davenport, I said into the microphone. Financial Crimes Division, FBI Chicago Field Office. I am the lead investigator on a federal case involving the fraudulent misappropriation of $175 million in HUD emergency housing relief funds, funds designated by Congress for low-income families, displaced by flooding across Cook and Lake counties. The screens behind the stage came alive, the shell company structure, the offshore accounts, the falsified cost documentation, and then the email thread, enlarged to 40-point font across a screen 20 feet wide, the words "someone we can manage," and her word against the record, hanging above the ballroom in letters that no one in the room could pretend not to read. The sound from the Davenport table was not a word. It was something between a gasp and a groan. The sound of a story ending before its author was anywhere near finished with it. The Davenport Development Group fraudulently obtained federal emergency housing funds and redirected them to luxury condominium construction in premium Chicago neighborhoods, I said. The principals additionally placed my name and federal credentials on compliance documentation with documented, premeditated intent to direct criminal liability toward me in the event of a federal audit. I paused. Special Agent Davenport. Director Hollins's voice came through the room's PA from the side entrance, where he stood beside the U.S. Attorney. The warrants are confirmed, the floor is yours. 19 FBI agents and 6 IRS criminal investigation officers rose from their seats simultaneously. Spencer moved first, or tried to. He stood up fast, knocking his chair backward, his eyes going straight to the exits the way a man's eyes do, when he has spent 10 days telling himself the exits would still be available. 2 agents reached him before he completed his first step. He said something. I reviewed the audio recording later, but his voice was muffled against the marble, and then his arms were being secured behind him, and the award plaque sitting at his place setting caught the edge of the table and rang against the floor. Annette screamed. Not a word, a sound raw and unformed, the sound of someone who has spent her entire adult life accumulating things, finally understanding that things can be taken. Annette Davenport. An IRS agent extended his badge. Your domestic and offshore accounts are frozen effective immediately pursuant to federal civil asset forfeiture. All property held in your name or in the name of Davenport Development subsidiaries is subject to seizure pending federal proceedings. She stopped screaming. She started to cry instead, the expensive mascara cutting clean lines down her face. My father did not scream. My father did not cry. He stood up from his chair slowly, taking deliberate care not to wrinkle his suit jacket, and he looked across the length of that ballroom at me standing on the stage. I don't know what he was looking for. Whatever it was, I don't believe he found it. You are burning everything down, he said. His voice was still controlled, still trying to sound like the man at the head of the dining room table. I looked at him from the stage. I am making sure the families in Cook and Lake counties get the homes that were promised to them, I said. That is what I have always done. He was still looking at me when the agents took his arms. My mother sat at the Davenport table and did not move. She did not reach for my father. She did not call out to Spencer. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched her family being led out of the ballroom with the same careful stillness she had brought to every difficult moment in that house. The stillness of a witness who decided long ago that consequences belonged to other people. She was not arrested that night. She cooperated with investigators and was not charged. I watched her walk out of the Palmer house alone, her coat buttoned to the collar, the valet pulling a car around for a home she would not own for much longer. I do not have a clean word for what I felt watching her go. I'm not sure one exists. 7 months later, the Chicago sky was the pale clean blue it gets in early October when the lake wind finally settles. My father was convicted on 13 counts of federal wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, the conspiracy charge carrying an enhancement for the deliberate, documented targeting of a federal agent. He is serving 24 years in a federal correctional facility. He will be 83 years old at his first eligibility hearing. Spencer received 14 years. Annette cooperated fully with the U.S. Attorney's Office. She testified in detail, received a reduced sentence of supervised probation, and left the courtroom with nothing. No accounts, no property, no remaining architecture of the life she had been building on stolen federal funds. The Davenport estate on Lakeshore Drive was seized and liquidated by the federal government. The crystal chandelier, the original 17-arm cut crystal my grandfather installed in 1961, was removed carefully and reinstalled in the lobby of the Davenport Emergency Housing Complex in Riverdale, completed 8 months after the seizure using the recovered $175 million in federal funds. 314 families moved in last spring. Most of them had been living in FEMA temporary units for over 2 years. There is a brass plaque mounted in the lobby, beneath the chandelier, where the light falls exactly the way it always did. It reads, "For those who kept their word." I signed the paperwork to have it installed. I was there the morning the doors opened, navy blazer, sensible flats, and I watched 300 families carry boxes through an entrance that someone had tried very hard to lock them out of forever. My grandfather built that chandelier into a home that stood for 63 years. Standing in that lobby, watching the light move across those walls, I think he would have recognized exactly where it ended up.